Alright guys, so let's go ahead and take a look at the bones and joints of the leg and the foot. So first we'll start with the bones and look at the bony landmarks on them, and then we'll move into looking at where those bony landmarks come together to form those joints. So first we're starting with the femur. Now we've already done the upper half of the femur in last week's lecture, so we're only going to pertain ourselves with the lower half of the femur, and with that said, we're looking at the condyles. So very similar here to the humerus, we do have the condyles. Of course, we have an epicondyle as well, which is just a part that sits on top of the condyle. But we have two condyles, one on the medial side and then one on the lateral side of the femur here. So a medial and lateral condyle as well as an epicondyle. Of course, we also have here on the front of the femur a notch for the patella, which this right here, this bone, is your patella. This is your kneecap, as it's commonly known. The kneecap or patella bone is a sesamoid type bone that grows and develops inside the tendon of the quadriceps, the common quadriceps tendon. So over time, through infancy, this builds and gets bigger as you age and develops, and then just helps with locking your knee in place when it's in full extension there. We're not going to worry about any of the other landmarks here that's displayed on this picture. So we're going to move on to the two bones of the leg. So we have the tibia, and then we have the fibula right here. So the two long bones of the leg, the tibia and the fibula. So here we're looking at the anterior tibia. This looks like let's see, this would be a left tibia and a fibula. So first thing to note is that, one, your tibia is more medial while your fibula is lateral. So make sure you do know which bone is medial and which one is lateral. So this is the anterior tibia here of the left leg, and this would be, I assume, is the posterior picture here. So first, we can see right here on the posterior picture, we have these little grooves right here where the condyles of the femur are going to sit for that articulation. So for the sake of ease and convenience, we're also going to note that the tibia has condyles. We have a medial condyle and a lateral condyle. So a medial condyle and a lateral condyle. So we'll just sum up the little groove right there with the two condyles of the tibia. Now, on the tibia as well, right here in between those two condyles on the anterior margin is a little notch for the patella. So this is a little patella notch. You can see right here, there's a big bump right here on the front of your shin, which you could actually feel right below your knee. You'll feel this little bump on the front of your shin, and that's called the tibial tuberosity. So it's a little bump on the shin, the tibial tuberosity. So of course, like any long bone, the tibia has a shaft, or the big central portion, and then at the very distal end of the tibia we see this big bump right here called the malleolus. So we have two malleoli in the leg. We have one malleoli belonging to the tibia, and then we have one malleoli belonging to the fibula over here. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the landmarks of the fibula briefly. So with the fibula, we have at the very top of the fibula the head of the fibula. Then of course we have the body as or shaft, as is common with any other long bone, and then we have the malleolus right here. So we have the two malleoli, one on the tibia, one on the fibula. So this would be the medial malleolus, while this would be the lateral malleolus. So if you just remember which bone is which and know that they each have a malleoli, you can remember which malleoli is belonging to which bone. So the tibia has the medial malleolus and the fibula has the lateral malleolus. So now let's go ahead and move on to the bones of the foot here. So first, we can see that there's lots of bones in the foot complex. And so some of the major bones we're going to look at here in the back of the foot is one, this talus. This is the talus right here. Also depicted right here as well, the talus. And should be right here as well, is the talus, yes. So the talus is the highest point, the highest bone of the foot complex. And this is the bone that actually articulates with the malleoli, the two malleoli of the shin bones to make the ankle joint. Now the next bone that we're going to look at of the foot is called the calcaneus, which is right here. The calcaneus is your heel. The calcaneus is your heel. So this is the back part of your foot. This is the part of your foot that you place down on the ground here. So that is the calcaneus right there. Then a little bit smaller is the navicular. So the navicular being right here in the superior view, can't really see it. Oh, it's right here, sorry. And then right here as well on the other aspect of the foot. So the navicular, again, so these bones all kind of work together. We're going to look at these together when it comes to a joint. They actually all kind of articulate with each other to do movements, which we'll see here in a little bit. Now, one thing to note about the foot, there's three regions of the foot, and though it's not technically sound, I usually group up the navicular just to keep the navicular with the talus and the calcaneus. I group it up into a different part of the foot, even though it's not the technical part. So real quick, let's take a look at the three parts of the foot. We have the hind foot, the midfoot, and then the forefoot. So the hind foot would consist of the talus and the calcaneus, but like I said, for my sake of convenience, just to know that they go together, I like to throw the navicular in there too. The midfoot would contain, and we'll look at these new landmarks here, the midfoot would contain the cuboid. The cuboid is this large square-like bone that is part of the tarsal bone. So just like in the wrist we had the carpal bones, in the foot we have tarsal bones. So the tarsal refers to the foot. So the cuboid is the largest cube-like bone in the tarsals, in the tarsal group. And then of course we have the cuneiforms. We have three cuneiforms that accompany the cuboid to make up the rest of the tarsal bones. We have three of them, a lateral, a medial, and an intermediate as well. So the cuneiforms, as I think, because I think of small little bones in the foot, cute little feet, cuneiforms, cutiforms. Cuneiforms are the tarsal bones of the foot. So just as we had in the hand lecture, we had bones coming off of the carpal bones called the metacarpals. Well, we'll have bones here in the foot coming off of the tarsal bones called the metatarsals. So keep in mind that luckily this picture has this nice numbering here, that we always number our digits starting with the biggest digit, our thumb, in the hand's reference, or big toe in the foot's reference, as our first digit, and then we number all the way out to the fifth digit, which would be the pinky of the foot or the hand. So here we have the metatarsals. The metatarsals extend off of the tarsal bones and have the following landmarks. They have a base, they have a shaft, and then they have a head at the opposite end. So a base, a shaft, and a head. And this is going to be the same landmarks for the next bones we're going to look at, which are here. As you remember from the forearm and hand lecture, we have the phalangeal bones. So we have different phalangeal bones here. We have, as you can see, not there. So in the foot, on the big toe, we only have two phalangeal bones, while in the rest of the digits, we have three phalangeal bones, and then of course a joint in between them. And then the landmarks for these bones are going to be the exact same as they were for the metatarsal. So a base, a shaft in the central portion, and then a head. So with the bones and bony landmarks out the way, let's go ahead and put them together for the joints. So now that we've taken a look at those bones and their landmarks, let's go ahead and put those landmarks together and make those joints. So we're going to take a top-down approach for this lecture here. So we're going to start right here where the femur meets the tibia. So we call this joint the femorotibial joint, or the tibiofemoral joint, the tibiofemoral joint between the tibia and the femur. This is what we call the knee joint. Yes, the knee joint here. So what exactly is coming together? Well, we have the condyles of the femur, and then we had those little surfaces of the tibia where the condyles would meet. So we'll just say it's condyle to condyle action. So the tibial condyles and the femoral condyles come together, and then they do this little rocking motion. So we can see that this is a hinge joint, right? And we can tell that it's going to do flexion and extension. But there's a little kick to, pun intended, right? A little kick to this movement here of this flexion and extension. So if we were to actually look at, and stand up and do this yourself, you can really see that when we bend our knee, our leg actually kind of turns and our foot comes more towards and kind of kicks us in the butt. It's not a straight angle like it would just come straight back and then hit our trochanter. It comes back and hits more of our, ischial side of our butt there. So it has this rotation as it comes into position. This little rotation when it comes into position. We call that the screw home mechanism. The screw home mechanism of the knee is that little bit of rotation as the knee comes into place for its position. So let's look at some very important structures with the knee. So namely, I know we don't very often look at ligaments and things of joints in relation for massage and MBLEX testing, but with the knee, that's not the case because there's a lot of structures in here and a lot of ligaments we do want to have an understanding of. Now, a lot of these ligaments and structures are pretty common that most people have probably heard of them, especially if you're into sports and athletes who have their sports injuries. So the first ligaments we're going to look at are the MCL and LCL. Again, some of you might have heard of this. MCL and LCL. Well, the CL stands for collateral ligament. Collateral means it's on the side. It runs straight up and down on the sides. So we have collateral ligaments. They're on the outside of the condyles. So they run from condyle to condyle in a loose, easy to remember sense. So condyle to condyle, condyle to condyle. It's like taking two pieces of tape and slapping them on the sides of the knee to just kind of hold it together. So if you're trying to bind this knee together, you're like taping it together, boom, you'd slap two right there, right? So boom, two little pieces of tape. Now, the collateral ligaments, MCL, LCL, well, those the M and the L have to stand for medial and then lateral. Medial, lateral. Medial collateral, lateral collateral. Medial collateral, lateral collateral. Medial collateral. Okay, I'm stopping. So the next ones we're looking at, the next ligaments in the knee are called the ACL and the PCL. Don't associate the CL from the MCL with these ligaments here. That's completely different. The ACL and PCL, the CL stands for cruciate ligaments. And I think cruciate, crucifix. A crucifix is a cross, right? And that's exactly what these ligaments do. They cross each other. We have the ACL, or anterior cruciate ligament, and then the PCL, or posterior cruciate ligament. They're straight deep in the knee and essentially in the center of the knee, and they just help with preventing those forward and backward movements there. So another important structure of the knee is the meniscus. So on the little surfaces of the tibia where the femur meets are those little meniscus, kind of like the intervertebral discs here, the little paddings and cushions that help with the articulation and help with a whole slew of stuff that we're just not going to get into. So the meniscus are little pads on the side of the knee. We have two meniscus or two menisci in the knee. Now, of course, don't forget in relation to the knee of this bone right here, that sesamoid bone that we looked at, the patella, which grows in the common quadriceps tendon, which helps with locking the knee in place with full extension. So, very similar to the rest of these joints from here on out,
to the forearm and hand. So make sure you go back and review that to see the very commonalities between these two lectures, and that it's just easy to associate and remember both sides. But it gets a little tricky when we look at some of those names because they're very similar. So we remember that in the shin, in the leg region here, we have the tibia and the fibula. So the tibia and the fibula meet in two places, just like the radius and the ulna met in two places. We have a proximal end where they meet and a distal end where they meet. So the proximal tibio-fibular joint and the distal tibio-fibular joint. So proximal tibial-fibular joint, distal tibio-fibular joint. We're not going to look at any movements because there really isn't any movement that occurs there, unlike in the forearm and hand where we would have that pronation and supination action. But yeah, we're not going to look at anything there. So one key thing to note is the region of the shin, which composes both the tibia and the fibula, is known as the crural region. So we're going to use that little piece of information to help us understand this next joint. So this next joint is made by the talus, which is that bone in the ankle we saw, the talus, and then the tibia and the fibula, those malleoli of the tibia and the fibula. So we call this joint the talocrural. So instead of saying both bones, the tibia and the fibula, we're just going to sum them up into the crural region, and it's the talocrural region. So this is the talus articulating with the two bones that make the shin, or known as the crural, which is the tibia and the fibula. So this is what we call the ankle joint. So the ankle joint is the talocrural joint, and the ankle joint itself does just flexion and extension, which is obviously makes it a hinge joint. But when it comes to that flexion and extension, it's a little different in its terminology for the foot. So our extension, which is bringing the foot up, so if we were to extend our foot, we would bring the top of our foot towards our shin, or if we were to flex, we would take the bottom of our foot and point it down. We call that dorsiflexion and plantarflexion respectively. So I like to think that, turn you right here, Dex. So I like to think that if this foot is like a dolphin, right? Nah, that was a horrible dolphin noise. Flipper does it better. But if we look at the foot as if it's like a dolphin, especially it almost kind of has that little dolphin appearance, right? We know that on the top of the dolphin is a dorsal fin. So on the top of the foot would be a dorsal fin. So the dorsal surface of the foot is the top of the foot. So dorsiflexing, we're bringing the foot up, right? And then the opposite, plantarflexion, like we're planting our foot in the ground, our foot is going down towards the ground, plantarflexion of the foot. So the next joint we're looking at here, I might as well keep his leg up. The next joint we're looking at here is the joint between the talus, the calcaneus, and the navicular, those three bones that we saw that kind of makes up the back of the foot there. So the talus, the calcaneus, and the navicular come together and has a crazy long name, but I assure you it's super simple. It's the talo-calcaneo-navicular joint. Well, we just slap all those names together. Talo-calcaneo-navicular, talo-calcaneo-navicular, right? So that joint comes together, and we're not going to look at too much. It's technically a pseudo ball and socket type joint, and this is where we get our supination and pronation of the foot. So it's not at the ankle itself where we get that action. It's really deeper into the foot, right underneath the ankle joint, that allows that supination and pronation. So what exactly does supination and pronation look like with the foot? Well, if our foot is standing or facing straight out, if our foot turns in, so if we turn our foot in, that is supination. If we turn our foot out, that is pronation. Now there's other words that we use for supination and pronation, but these are only small parts of the whole process that is supination and pronation. We call it eversion and inversion. Inversion, as we turn in, is supination. Eversion, as we turn the foot out, is eversion. Or pronation, excuse me. So remember that the talocalcaneo-navicular joint helps with that pronation-supination complex. And remember, inversion is associated to pronation, supination, and then eversion is associated to pronation. So we're going to skip the tarsal joints here, and we're just going to go straight to where the metatarsals extend from the tarsals. So very similar to the wrist and the hand, we had the carpo-metacarpal joint. Well, we have the tarso-metatarsal joint, which is made by the base of the metatarsal and the tarsal bone. Again, no movement occurs here. It's pretty set solid. There's no movement that really occurs here. So let's go ahead and just jump it down to the next joint, which is the joint that is the big knuckle of the toe. So the big knuckle of the toe, right here, right? So that big knuckle, very similar to the big knuckle of our hand, just that we had the metacarpal phalangeal joint, we have the metatarsal phalangeal joint, metatarso phalangeal joint, which again does exactly the same actions as the fingers do. We can do flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction, right? All of those movements can occur at the big toe, or at the big knuckle joint of the toes. So flexion, extension, adduction, abduction. And then of course, you know, if you really concentrate, you can kind of make that little circular circumduction motion. So coming past that joint, again, we come into the same thing. We have the digits of the foot. So remember that just like in the hand where we number our digits, so let me get your bones here, Dex. So just like we had in the hand, we always number our digits. So left foot, left hand. Our big toe and our thumb are always the first digit. Our pinky toe and our pinky are the fifth digit. And then, of course, we number every other, finger digit accordingly. So in these digits, very similar to the hand lecture, in the big toe, there was only 2 phalangeal bones. And in the other toes, there were 3 phalangeal bones. And then in between those phalangeal bones was a joint called the inter meaning in between, phalangeal joint, interphalangeal joint, a joint in between the phalangeal bones. So in the big toe, we just had the interphalangeal joint, or IPJ, of the foot, because there's only 2 bones. In the rest of the digits, we had the interphalangeal joints. We had proximal and distal, because there's 2 interphalangeal joints in each other toe there, and each toe outside of the big toe, or hallicus as we call it. So remembering back to the hand lecture, well, if we hold down the big knuckle, our joints here in the fingers, they can only flex and extend. They can't do any abduction or whatever of that nature. They only flex and extend, so they are hinge joints. So guys, that's going to complete our lecture for the bones and joints and bony landmarks. So go ahead and take your notes, study up, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.